The council chamber of the Zrathian Empire stretched nearly half a kilometer in length, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 1,000 captured stars. High Counselor Vex there stood before the assembled representatives of 300 subjugated species, his four arms spread wide in a gesture that conveyed both amusement and dismissal. The holographic projection hovering above the central podium showed a small blue planet, insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic conquest, rotating slowly as if unaware of its impending fate. Humans, Vexthar announced, his translator converting his chittering language into something the various species could understand. They call themselves humans. A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the chamber, though it manifested differently across the various alien physiologies. Some hissed, others produced clicking sounds, and a few simply vibrated with what could only be interpreted as mirth. The High Counselor's primary eyes narrowed as he manipulated the hologram with a gesture, zooming in on the planet's surface. They have existed in space for barely a century. Their fastest vessels require months to traverse their own small solar system. They fight among themselves over resources that exist in abundance throughout the galaxy. And yet, he paused for dramatic effect, his mandibles clicking together in the Zrathian equivalent of a smile. They have refused our generous offer of incorporation into the Empire. Subcommander Krelnix, a battle-scarred veteran of 63 planetary conquests, rose from his seat in the warriors section of the council. His exoskeleton bore the markings of countless victories, each one a testament to the Empire's unstoppable military might. High Counselor, if I may speak, he began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of warfare. Every species believes themselves special before they face the Empire's legions. The humans will be no different. We have fought and conquered species with natural armor that can withstand plasma fire, species with telepathic abilities that can crush mines from orbit, species with technology thousands of years more advanced than these humans. He spoke the last word as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. What can these soft, short-lived creatures possibly do against the might of the Zrathian Empire? The hologram shifted again, this time showing images captured by long-range reconnaissance drones. The images displayed human cities, their primitive vehicles crawling along designated pathways on the ground, their atmospheric aircraft that could barely break the sound barrier, their naval vessels that floated on water like toys. Another shift showed human soldiers, bipedal creatures with only 2 arms, no natural armor, no claws or fangs worth mentioning, carrying chemical projectile weapons that seemed laughably primitive compared to the energy weapons the Empire had been using for millennia. According to our intelligence, Vexthar continued, the humans have approximately 200 nation-states on their world, many of which maintain separate military forces. They cannot even achieve unity among their own kind. More sounds of amusement echoed through the chamber. Their most powerful weapons are fusion-based devices that they are reluctant to use for fear of harming their own planet. They possess no energy shields, no quantum processors, no anti-gravity technology beyond the most rudimentary forms. Their understanding of physics is adequate for a pre-contact species, but woefully insufficient for modern warfare. What the Council didn't know, what their vast intelligence networks had failed to grasp, was that at that very moment, in a bunker 300 meters beneath the Rocky Mountains on Earth, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. President Sarah Chin sat at the head of a table surrounded by military generals, scientists, and intelligence officers. The mood in the room was not one of panic, as might be expected from a species facing an empire that controlled half the galaxy. Instead, it was one of grim determination and cold calculation. "Let them laugh," General Marcus Torres said, his weathered hands folded on the table before him. "Every moment they spend underestimating us is a moment we have to prepare." The holographic display in the Earth bunker showed the same images the Zrathians were viewing, intercepted through humanity's own recently developed quantum entanglement communication network. Humanity had been listening to alien transmissions for 3 years now, ever since the first contact had been made. That contact had not been the peaceful meeting of minds that humanity had hoped for, but rather a demand for immediate and unconditional surrender. Dr. Rebecca Okonkwo, the head of Earth's Xenotechnology Division, leaned forward. "We've had 36 months to study the debris from their scout ships. The ones they thought disappeared due to navigation errors or equipment malfunction." A thin smile crossed her face. "They have no idea we've been shooting them down, reverse engineering their technology, and learning everything we can about their capabilities. "What's our assessment?" President Chen asked, her dark eyes focused and sharp. She had been a fighter pilot before entering politics, had flown combat missions in 3 different conflicts, and she understood better than most what was coming. Admiral James Park, head of the newly formed Solar Defense Fleet, stood and activated his own set of displays. "Ma'am, they have us beat on raw technology. Their weapons are more powerful, their ships are faster, and they have numbers we can't match. A straight fight would be suicide." He paused and his expression hardened. "But warfare has never been about just technology and numbers. It's about strategy, adaptation, and the will to do whatever it takes to survive." The Zrathian Empire had conquered 300 species over the course of 5,000 years. They had refined warfare to a science, developed tactics and strategies that had proven effective against every form of resistance they had encountered. Their approach was methodical, overwhelming, and devastatingly effective. First came the demonstration of power, orbital bombardment of a military installation or unpopulated area to show what resistance would bring. Then came the demand for surrender, followed by occupation if accepted, or systematic destruction if refused. Species after species had chosen survival over extinction, bowing before the Empire's might. But the Empire had never faced humanity before. 3 days after the Council meeting, the Zrathian First Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 50 dreadnoughts, each 3 kilometers in length and bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. 200 cruisers designed for planetary bombardment and orbital superiority. 500 support vessels carrying troops, equipment, and the infrastructure needed to occupy a conquered world. It was a force that had brought down civilizations 1,000 times more technologically advanced than Earth. Fleet Commander Rathzel stood on the bridge of the flagship Inevitable, his 4 eyes scanning the tactical displays with practiced ease. The primitive human homeworld was still hours away at sublight speeds, but already his sensors were picking up the expected response. Small craft were launching from the planet's surface and from orbital stations. Pitiful defensive satellites were powering up their primitive weapons. Radio transmissions filled with panic and desperate calls for unity crackled across the electromagnetic spectrum. "They scramble like insects before the exterminator," remarked his tactical officer, a younger Zrathian who had only participated in a dozen conquests. "Should we broadcast the standard surrender terms?" Rathzel considered this. "No. Let them see our fleet first. Let them truly understand the futility of resistance. Then we will speak to them." He settled into his command throne, a piece of furniture that had been occupied by 7 fleet commanders before him, each one victorious in their campaigns. "Maintain current speed and formation. Charge all weapon systems. Prepare the demonstration strike protocols." What Rathzel couldn't see, what his sensors failed to detect, were the thousands of small objects floating in the asteroid belt, disguised as common rocks and debris. Each one was a weapons platform, built in secret over the past 3 years using a combination of human ingenuity and reverse-engineered alien technology. They were cold, their power cores in minimal operation mode, giving off no energy signature that would distinguish them from the countless other chunks of rock and ice that populated the belt. Aboard Orbital Command Station Armstrong, Commander Lisa Kowalski watched the alien fleet's approach on her displays. Her hands were steady as she input commands, though her heart was racing. Every man and woman under her command knew what was at stake. They knew they were outgunned, outmatched, and facing an enemy that had never known defeat. They also knew they were humanity's first line of defense, and failure meant extinction. "All units report ready," her tactical officer announced. "The Admiral's plan is in effect. We're transmitting the expected panic signals. Enemy fleet is maintaining course and speed, no indication they suspect the trap." "Good," Kowalski replied. "Humanity's first rule of warfare: appear weak when you are strong. Sun Tzu wrote that 2,500 years ago, and it's still true today." She took a deep breath. "All stations maintain the illusion. Let them think we're terrified prey. Let them come in close." The Zrathian fleet crossed the orbit of Neptune, then Uranus, their sensors sweeping space for any sign of hidden threats. They found nothing but the expected defensive positions around Earth itself, concentrated in orbit around the planet and its moon. Rathzel felt the satisfaction of a predator that has cornered its prey. The humans had pulled all their forces back to defend their homeworld, a classic mistake made by species who valued their birthplace over tactical advantage. Fleet Commander, his communications officer announced, we are receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. Audio and visual. Should I put it through? Display it, Rathzel commanded. The main view screen shifted to show a human female, dressed in formal attire, seated at a desk with a flag behind her. President Chen looked directly into the camera, her expression grave but composed. I am President Sarah Chen of the United Earth Government, she began, her words translated in real time by the Zrathian computer systems. On behalf of humanity, I ask you to halt your advance and enter into diplomatic negotiations. We are aware of the Zrathian Empire's military superiority. We do not seek conflict with your people. Surely there is a path to peaceful coexistence that does not require the subjugation of either our species or yours. Rathzel laughed, a sound that came out as a series of clicks and chirps. Prepare a response. I will speak to their leader. When the communication channel was opened, he leaned forward, making sure his full physical presence was visible. Humans were known to respond to intimidation, and his species had evolved as apex predators. I am Fleet Commander Rathzel of the Zrathian Imperial Navy. Your request for negotiation is noted and denied. The Empire does not negotiate with species beneath its dominion. You have one option and one option only, unconditional surrender. You will submit to Imperial authority, disarm all military forces, and accept governance by appointed Imperial administrators. Refusal will result in the destruction of your military infrastructure, followed by systematic bombardment of population centers until compliance is achieved. On Earth, President Chen's expression didn't change. And if we refuse? Then your species will serve as an example to the galaxy of the price of defiance, Rathzel replied coldly. You have 12 of your hours to respond. Use them wisely. He cut the transmission and turned to his tactical officer. Select a target for demonstration. One of their military installations, something significant but not critical. We'll show them we can strike with precision and overwhelming force. What Rathzel didn't know was that every second of that transmission was being analyzed by hundreds of Earth's top scientists and military strategists. They were studying his physiology, his speech patterns, his body language. They were examining the visible portions of his ship's bridge, analyzing the technology, looking for weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Humanity had learned long ago that information was power, and every interaction with the enemy provided valuable intelligence. The 12 hours passed with agonizing slowness. The Zrathian fleet held position at the orbit of Mars, their weapons charged and ready. On Earth, final preparations were being made. Families said goodbye to soldiers who might never return. Scientists ran final checks on experimental weapons systems. Religious leaders offered prayers in 1,000 different traditions to gods that might or might not exist, asking for deliverance from the threat that hung over humanity like a sword. When the deadline expired, no surrender came from Earth. Instead, President Chen appeared once more on all communication channels, broadcasting not just to the Zrathian fleet but to every human settlement in the solar system, every ship and station and outpost. People of Earth, she began, we face an enemy that has conquered hundreds of worlds, that commands power beyond our current ability to match. They offer us a choice between slavery and extinction. They believe we will choose slavery as so many others have before us. They believe we will bow our heads and accept chains rather than risk destruction. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with iron resolve. They don't understand humanity. They don't understand that we are a species that has climbed from caves to the stars through determination and refusal to accept defeat. They don't understand that we have faced extinction events before and survived. They don't understand that for humans, freedom is not negotiable. Rathzel watched the transmission with growing irritation. Brave words from a species about to die. Tactical, you have the coordinates for the demonstration strike? Yes, Commander. Target is the military installation they call Cheyenne Mountain. Firing solution calculated and locked. Fire. A beam of coherent energy lanced across the void, crossing the distance between Mars and Earth in seconds. It struck the atmosphere, burning through it like a knife through water, and impacted exactly where it was intended to. The mountain itself shuddered under the impact, and for a moment it seemed as if the entire range might collapse. But when the energy dissipated and the sensors cleared, the mountain still stood. Damaged, certainly, with entire sections of its face melted and cooled into glass, but not destroyed. Rathzel's mandibles clicked together in confusion. That should have vaporized the entire installation. Increase power to maximum and fire again. But before the order could be executed, alarms began blaring across the Zrathian flagship. Commander. Massive energy spikes detected throughout the asteroid belt. Weapons platforms powering up. Multiple targeting locks on our fleet. What? Rathzel spun to face the tactical display, and what he saw there made his blood run cold. Thousands of red icons were appearing on the screen, surrounding his fleet in a sphere of potential death. How did those get there? Why didn't we detect them during our approach? The answer came in the form of action rather than words. The hidden platforms opened fire simultaneously, and the asteroid belt lit up like a newborn star. Railgun projectiles accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, nuclear-pumped laser warheads, fusion missiles, and weapons that shouldn't have existed in humanity's arsenal all converged on the Zrathian fleet. The Empire's shields held against the first wave, energy barriers flaring bright as they absorbed and deflected the incoming fire. But the second wave came immediately after, and the third after that, and the platforms kept firing, pouring out a volume of fire that no pre-contact species should have been capable of generating. Return fire. All ships return fire. Rathzel commanded, gripping his command throne as the inevitable shuddered under the impact of a railgun slug that punched through the shields and cratered the armor on the starboard side. Get us out of this kill zone. All ships, emergency acceleration toward the enemy homeworld. It was exactly the response Admiral Park had predicted. They'll panic, he had said during the planning sessions, and when they panic they'll do what any commander does, try to close with the enemy. They'll run toward Earth thinking we can't fire on them there without risking our own planet. They were wrong about that too. The Zrathian fleet accelerated toward Earth, their own weapons firing back at the platforms in the asteroid belt, destroying hundreds of them. But for every platform destroyed, a dozen more remained operational, continuing to pour fire into the fleet's rear guard. Ships began to fall, their shields overwhelmed, their hulls breached, atmosphere and crew spilling into space. As the fleet crossed the orbit of Mars, they encountered the second surprise. What they had identified as orbital defense platforms around Earth were not stationary targets waiting to be destroyed. They were mobile weapons platforms, and they had been quietly moving into intercept positions for the past 12 hours. They opened fire with weapons that made the asteroid belt platforms look primitive by comparison. Humanity had spent 3 years studying captured Zrathian technology. They had learned how the energy shields worked, had discovered the specific frequencies and modulations that the Empire used. And more importantly, they had learned how to counter them. The weapons firing from Earth orbit weren't using human technology or even reverse-engineered alien technology. They were using something new, something born from the combination of human creativity and alien science. Quantum disruptors tore through shields that were designed to stop conventional energy weapons. Graviton mines created localized distortions in spacetime that crushed ships like tin cans. Nanite warheads that the Empire's sensors couldn't distinguish from ordinary nuclear weapons until they detonated, releasing clouds of microscopic machines that ate through hull armor like acid. This is impossible. Rathzel roared as another of his dreadnoughts exploded, torn apart by weapons that shouldn't exist. They're a pre-contact species. They can't have this level of technology. His science officer, one of the few Zrathians aboard who had studied humanity's history in any depth, spoke up from his station. Commander, I tried to warn the Council. Humans are unlike any species we've encountered before. They don't just adapt to threats, they weaponize everything they learn. In their own history, they've gone from primitive aircraft to orbital spacecraft in less than a single lifetime. They've turned peaceful nuclear energy into weapons that can destroy cities. They've taken communication technology and turned it into warfare networks. They see a technology and immediately ask not just, how does this work, but, how can we use this to fight? Silence. Rathzel commanded. I don't need history lessons, I need solutions. Where is their fleet? Where are their ships? The answer to that question came moments later, as sensors detected multiple hyperspace exits within the solar system. Not at the edges where such exits were safe and expected, but close in, dangerously close to the massive gravity wells of the inner planets. Ships began appearing throughout the combat zone, and while they were clearly of human design, incorporating the angular lines and utilitarian construction humanity favored, they were also clearly built with technology that shouldn't have been available to them. The solar defense fleet had been built in secret over 3 years, constructed in facilities hidden in the asteroid belt and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Every ship was a hybrid of human engineering and alien technology, crewed by men and women who had trained in simulators until they could operate the vessels in their sleep. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the SDF Indomitable, Earth's first true battleship, and watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. All ships execute attack pattern Delta. Target their command vessels. Let's cut the head off this snake. The human fleet dove into the Zrathian formation like wolves among sheep, their smaller size and greater maneuverability allowing them to dodge the heavy weapons fire from the Imperial dreadnoughts while striking at vulnerable points with surgical precision. Humanity had studied the Empire's tactics for 3 years, had analyzed every battle they could get information on, and they had learned. The Empire fought with overwhelming force and traditional formations, relying on their technological superiority to crush opposition. They expected enemies to either flee or try to match them ship for ship in conventional warfare. They weren't prepared for an enemy that had spent its entire existence fighting itself, developing tactics and counter-tactics, strategies and counter-strategies, in an endless arms race that had refined the art of war to a level the Empire hadn't needed to reach in millennia. Human ships didn't try to slug it out with the dreadnoughts. They targeted engines and weapons systems, used hit-and-run tactics, coordinated their fire to overwhelm individual targets before moving to the next. They used the debris from destroyed ships as cover and concealment, launched decoys that mimicked their energy signatures, and employed electronic warfare that made the Zrathian sensors show phantom targets and miss real ones. "This can't be happening," Rathzel muttered as he watched his fleet being torn apart. Already he had lost 30% of his dreadnoughts and almost half of his cruisers. The support vessels were being systematically destroyed by long-range fire from the platforms that were still operational in the asteroid belt. We're the Zrathian Empire. We don't lose to primitives. But they were losing and Rathzel knew it. The question now was whether to continue the fight and risk losing the entire fleet, or to retreat and face the shame of being the first fleet commander in Imperial history to be defeated by a pre-contact species. The decision was made for him when a spread of quantum torpedoes, fired from 3 different human ships in a coordinated attack, overwhelmed the Inevitable shields and tore into the engineering section. The flagship's main power core went critical, and damage control teams scrambled to prevent a catastrophic failure. "All ships," Rathzel commanded, his pride warring with his sense of survival, "retreat to minimum safe distance and prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. We are withdrawing from this system." As the battered remnants of the First Fleet limped away from Earth, accelerating toward the edge of the system where they could safely open hyperspace windows, the humans didn't pursue. They had achieved their objective, the defense of Earth. They had proven that humanity could fight back, could stand against the might of the Empire. But Admiral Park knew this was only the beginning. He stood on his bridge, looking at the tactical display showing the retreating alien fleet, and his expression was grave. "Sir," his tactical officer said, "we did it. We won. We won the first battle," Park corrected. "But we just humiliated the Zrathian Empire in front of the entire galaxy. They came here expecting an easy conquest, and we bloodied their nose and sent them running." He turned to face his crew. "They'll be back. Next time they'll bring more ships, better tactics, and they won't underestimate us again." This was just the opening move. On the Inevitable, as the ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, Rathzel composed his report to the High Council with shaking hands. He had to explain how he had lost more than half his fleet to a species that supposedly had no chance against Imperial might. He had to explain how humans had possessed technology they shouldn't have had, tactics they shouldn't have known, and a ferocity in combat that rivaled the Empire's most feared warrior species. Most importantly, he had to make the Council understand that humanity was not like the other species they had conquered. They were something new, something dangerous, something that would fight to the last breath rather than submit to foreign rule. The alien empire had laughed at humans. They had considered them insignificant, primitive, and easily conquered. But as the First Fleet jumped away from Earth's solar system, leaving behind the wreckage of dozens of ships and thousands of dead crew members, nobody in the Empire was laughing anymore. The war had begun and humanity had drawn first blood. The emergency session of the Zrathian High Council convened within hours of receiving Fleet Commander Rathzel's report. The crystalline chamber, which had once echoed with laughter at humanity's expense, now resonated with a very different sound: fury. High Counselor Vex there stood before the holographic display showing the aftermath of the battle, his 4 arms trembling with rage as he watched the recordings of human ships tearing through Imperial formations with tactics that should have been impossible for a species so young. 53 ships lost, Supreme War Marshal Krelnik stated, his voice carrying the cold precision of a career military officer analyzing a disaster. Including 12 dreadnoughts, 31 cruisers and 10 support vessels. Casualty estimates placed the death toll at over 40,000 Imperial personnel. He manipulated the hologram, zooming in on the engagement patterns. The humans didn't just fight us, counselors. They anticipated our tactics, countered our strategies, and exploited weaknesses in our formations that we didn't know existed. This was not the desperate struggle of a cornered prey species. This was a planned, coordinated defense executed with precision that rivals our own military academies. Counselor Veshtar, one of the oldest members of the assembly, rose from her seat. Her scales had faded with age, but her mind remained sharp as broken glass. Impossible. Our intelligence indicated they had no knowledge of hyperspace technology beyond theoretical physics. Our scouts confirmed they possessed no energy weapons, no advanced defensive systems, no fleet capable of system-wide coordination. How did they acquire all of this in the mere weeks since we issued our ultimatum? The science coordinator, a Zrathian named Plex Nor who had spent decades studying conquered species, activated his own display. They didn't acquire it in weeks, counselor. Analysis of the debris and recovered technology suggests they've been preparing for this confrontation for approximately 3 standard years. The timeline matches perfectly with the disappearance of our scout vessels in their system, the ones we attributed to equipment malfunction. Are you suggesting, Vexthar said slowly, each word dripping with dangerous intent, that the humans were shooting down our scouts and we didn't notice? Not suggesting, High Counselor. Confirming. Plex Nor pulled up technical specifications. Every piece of technology they used against us was derived from our own systems. They reverse-engineered our shields, our weapons, our power cores and then improved upon them. The quantum disruptors that tore through our defensive screens? Those used principles from our own physics, but applied in ways our scientists never considered. The graviton mines? Based on our gravity manipulation technology, but weaponized beyond anything in our arsenal. A murmur ran through the council chamber, a sound of disbelief and growing concern. In 5,000 years of expansion, no species had ever adapted imperial technology so quickly or so effectively. Most conquered races either lacked the scientific foundation to understand what they were seeing or were too dependent on their own technological paradigms to effectively integrate alien concepts. How? Demanded Vexthar. How does a pre-contact species accomplish this? Plex Nor pulled up historical data on humanity, information that should have been reviewed before the invasion but had been dismissed as irrelevant. Humans are what they call persistence predators, High Counselor. On their evolutionary path, they didn't develop the speed of pursuit predators or the strength of ambush predators. Instead, they developed endurance and adaptability. They would track prey for days, wearing them down, learning their patterns, adapting their strategies until success was achieved. He changed the display to show humanity's technological development curve. This trait translated into their civilization. They don't just solve problems, they obsess over them. A human scientist presented with an unknown technology doesn't just study it. They dismantle it, rebuild it, improve it, and then teach others how to do the same. Then we will ensure they have no more of our technology to study, Krelnix declared. I am assembling the 3rd, 7th, and 12th fleets. Combined, they represent over 500 capital ships and 3,000 support vessels. We will overwhelm them with numbers they cannot possibly counter, regardless of their tactical ingenuity. But Plex Nor shook his head. War Marshal, with respect, that may be precisely what they want us to do. Humans have a saying, generals always fight the last war. They expect us to come back with more ships, using the same tactics, and they will be prepared for exactly that response. Their entire military history is built on adaptation and asymmetric warfare. When they faced enemies with superior numbers, they developed guerrilla tactics. When they faced enemies with superior technology, they found ways to turn that technology against them. When they faced enemies with superior position, they changed the battlefield itself. Vexthar's mandibles clicked together in thought. Then what do you suggest, Science Coordinator? That we simply accept this humiliation? That we allow a pre-contact species to defy the Empire and escape consequences? No, High Counselor. I suggest we stop treating them as a pre-contact species and start treating them as a pure military threat. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, that's what they've become. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For the first time in millennia, the Zrathian Empire faced an enemy that could truly hurt them. Meanwhile, 3 light-years away on Earth, humanity was having its own reckoning with the new reality. The victory celebration had lasted exactly 1 day before the sobering truth set in. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. President Qin stood in the same bunker where she had been when the Zrathian fleet arrived, but now the atmosphere was different. There was pride, certainly, but also a grim understanding of what was to come. "Casualty report," she said quietly. General Torres pulled up the data. 17 ships lost, including 2 of our heavy cruisers. 6,432 personnel killed in action, another 2,000 wounded. The asteroid belt defense platforms took heavy losses. 70% were destroyed during the engagement. Orbital platform Sagan was hit by a suicide run from a damaged Zrathian cruiser. We lost everyone aboard, another 800 people. The numbers were staggering by human standards. In the span of a few hours, Earth had lost more people than most military conflicts in recent history. But compared to what would have happened if the Zrathians had successfully invaded, it was a price humanity had been willing to pay. Dr. Okonkwo entered the room, her face drawn with exhaustion. She had been working non-stop since the battle ended, analyzing every piece of data they had collected. "We need to talk about what comes next," she said without preamble. "The Zrathians will return, and when they do, they'll be prepared for everything we used against them." "Recommendations?" President Qin asked. "We can't win a prolonged war of attrition," Okonkwo stated bluntly. "They have 300 conquered species providing resources, technology, and labor. They have thousands of ships we haven't seen yet, and industrial capacity that dwarfs anything we can build. If this becomes a straight fight of production and numbers, we lose." Admiral Park nodded in agreement. "Which means we need to change the nature of the conflict. We can't let this be a war of conquest. We need to make it a war of cost-benefit analysis." "Explain," Qin said, leaning forward. Park activated a star map showing the Zrathian Empire's territory. The Empire controls half the galaxy because conquest has always been profitable for them. They invade, they overwhelm, they occupy, and they extract resources and labor from the conquered species. The cost of conquest is always less than the benefit they receive. But if we can make the cost of conquering humanity exceed any possible benefit, they'll have to reconsider their strategy. "You're talking about making ourselves too expensive to conquer," Torres said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "We can't beat them militarily in the long run, so we make sure that even if they eventually win, it costs them so much that the victory is meaningless." "Exactly," Park confirmed. "But more than that, we need to think beyond just Earth. The Empire controls 300 species. How many of those species are happy with their subjugation? How many would rebel if they saw it was possible to resist successfully?" The implication was clear and staggering. Humanity wasn't just fighting for its own survival anymore. They were potentially igniting a rebellion that could spread across the entire galaxy. Dr. Okonkwo pulled up new schematics. "We've been developing something. Project Prometheus. We've taken what we learned from the Zrathian technology and created data packages, complete blueprints for weapons systems, defensive platforms, tactical doctrine, everything a species would need to defend themselves against Imperial aggression. If we can find a way to transmit this information to other subjugated species, we turn the Empire's conquered territories into active resistance zones," Qin finished. "Every species they control becomes a potential threat. They'd have to divert resources from attacking us to maintaining control of what they already have." "It's risky," Torres cautioned. "If we start fomenting rebellion across the Empire, we stop being a minor annoyance and become an existential threat to their entire civilization. They won't stop until we're completely destroyed." "They won't stop anyway," Qin replied. "We humiliated them, General. We did what 300 other species couldn't do. Even if we wanted to surrender now, they'd make an example of us that would echo across the galaxy for centuries." She looked around the room at her advisors, these men and women who carried the weight of humanity's future on their shoulders. "We're committed to this path. The only question is whether we fight smart or fight desperate." 6 weeks later, the Zrathian Armada assembled at Rally Point Creche, a massive staging area in neutral space. 3 full fleets, representing the largest military force the Empire had assembled in over 2 centuries. Supreme War Marshal Krelnix stood aboard the super dreadnought Absolute Dominion, a vessel so large it had its own internal atmosphere and could carry enough troops to occupy an entire continent. "All fleet commanders report status," Krelnix commanded. The holographic images of 37 fleet captains appeared before him. "Third Fleet ready for deployment, War Marshal. 200 capital ships, full combat readiness." 7th Fleet reporting. 180 capital ships, all systems operational. 12th Fleet standing by. 140 capital ships, ready for your command. Krelnix surveyed the assembled might of the Empire with satisfaction. This was more than enough to crush the human resistance. They had learned from Rathzel's defeat. New protocols had been implemented, constant active scanning to prevent hidden weapons platforms, tighter formations to provide overlapping defensive fire, and dedicated electronic warfare ships to counter the humans' apparent advantage in sensor manipulation. Begin the jump to the human system, Krelnix ordered. When we arrive, we will not waste time with demonstrations or ultimatums. We will destroy their defensive capabilities, neutralize their fleet, and begin systematic bombardment of military and industrial targets on their homeworld. They will surrender or they will die. There will be no third option. The Armada vanished into hyperspace, and across the Empire, beings watched and waited to see how the upstart humans would fare against this overwhelming display of force. Some watched with satisfaction, loyal citizens of the Empire eager to see order restored. Others watched with hope, subjugated species who dared to dream that perhaps, somehow, the impossible might happen again. The Zrathian Armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, and immediately knew something was wrong. The asteroid belt was empty. Not just empty of weapons platforms but completely empty. Every asteroid, every chunk of rock and ice, every piece of debris had been moved or destroyed. Scan for the human fleet, Krelnix commanded. They must be here somewhere. The sensors swept through the system, searching for energy signatures, heat emissions, anything that would indicate the presence of ships. They found nothing. Earth's orbit was clear of defensive platforms. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn showed no signs of the construction facilities intelligence had suggested were there. Mars' orbit was empty. It was as if humanity had simply vanished. War Marshal, the sensor officer reported, confusion evident in his voice, I'm detecting unusual readings from the inner planets. Mercury, Venus, and Mars are all showing elevated surface temperatures and significant electromagnetic activity. Elaborate, Krelnix demanded. Sir, it appears the humans have placed some kind of equipment on those worlds. The energy signatures are massive but diffused across the entire planetary surfaces. I can't get clear readings on what they're doing. The answer came in the form of action. The 3 planets, positioned in a carefully calculated alignment that had taken months to achieve, activated simultaneously. They weren't weapons platforms or defensive stations. They were amplifiers. Humanity had turned 3 entire worlds into components of the largest quantum entanglement transmitter ever constructed. The transmission burst outward in all directions, traveling faster than light through quantum-linked channels, carrying Project Prometheus to every corner of the galaxy. Every subjugated species with even basic quantum detection equipment would receive the complete data package. Weapons schematics, tactical doctrines, strategic planning guides, and most importantly, proof that the Zrathian Empire could be fought and defeated. What is that? Krelnix roared. What are they transmitting? His communication officer's face went pale as he analyzed the data. War Marshal, they're broadcasting technical specifications for weapons and defense systems. They're sending it everywhere, to all frequencies, in hundreds of different languages and data formats. They're giving away their military technology to the entire galaxy. Realization hit Krelnix like a physical blow. The humans weren't trying to defend just themselves. They were trying to spark a galaxy-wide rebellion. Jam that signal. Destroy those transmitters immediately. But before the order could be executed, space around the Zrathian fleet erupted with activity. Ships began appearing, emerging from hyperspace in groups of 3 and 4, executing hit-and-run attacks before jumping away again. These weren't the human ships from the first battle. These were smaller, faster, barely more than engines and weapons strapped to hyperspace generators. Drones, the tactical officer reported. Automated attack drones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The human fleet, it turned out, had never intended to fight this battle conventionally. While the Zrathians had been assembling their armada, humanity had been building drone fighters controlled by pilots safely stationed in bunkers on Earth and Mars. The drones jumped in, fired quantum torpedoes and railgun salvos, then jumped out before the Zrathian ships could target them effectively. It was death by 1,000 cuts. No single drone attack would destroy a capital ship, but the accumulating damage was wearing down shields and armor. And every moment the Zrathian fleet spent trying to swat these annoying gnats was another moment the transmission continued, spreading across the galaxy. All ships, focus fire on the planetary transmitters, Krelnix commanded. Ignore the drones. We need to stop that broadcast. The fleet turned toward the inner planets, their massive weapons charging for bombardment. But as they did, Earth itself finally showed its hand. The planet hadn't been evacuated or abandoned. It had been fortified. The entire world had become a weapon. Orbital mass drivers, built into the planet's crust and powered by tapping into Earth's own geothermal energy, began firing. Not energy weapons or missiles, but simple kinetic projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds. Chunks of metal traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, each one carrying the kinetic energy of nuclear weapons. The Zrathian shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb explosions, were less effective against solid matter moving at such incredible velocities. Ships began to buckle under the impacts, their shields collapsing, their armor shattering. "Return fire on the planet," Kralnix ordered. "Destroy those weapons." "War Marshal, if we bombard the planet from this range, the debris field will make navigation impossible. We'll trap ourselves in the system." "I don't care. Fire." The Zrathian fleet opened up with everything they had, pouring destruction onto Earth's surface. Cities evaporated under the onslaught, continents burned, oceans boiled. The mass drivers fell silent one by one as they were destroyed. But the transmission from the inner planets continued, and the drone attacks kept coming, relentless and unyielding. What Krelnix didn't know was that Earth's cities had been evacuated weeks ago. Humanity had seen this coming and had moved its population to underground bunkers, some built kilometers beneath the surface, designed to survive even orbital bombardment. The cities destroyed were empty shells, sacrificed to make the Zrathians commit to a position they couldn't easily retreat from. And then the human fleet arrived, not from hiding places in the solar system, but from outside it. They had been waiting in interstellar space, cold and silent, watching the battle through quantum-linked sensors. Now they jumped in behind the Zrathian formation, trapping them between the planet they were bombarding and the human ships at their rear. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of Indomitable, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. "All ships execute endgame protocol. Target their flagships and command vessels. Let's finish this." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for centuries. The Zrathians, caught in a disadvantageous position, fought with the desperation of a force that finally understood it had underestimated its enemy. The humans fought with the cold precision of a species that had planned every move, anticipated every countermove, and prepared for every contingency. Ships died on both sides, burning wrecks tumbling through space. The void between Earth and Mars became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen corpses. But slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. The Zrathian formation broke apart under the combined assault of the human fleet and the drone swarms. Ships began to flee, jumping to hyperspace individually rather than in organized groups. Aboard Absolute Dominion, Krelnix watched his fleet dissolve around him. 3 full fleets, the pride of the Empire, broken by a species that wasn't supposed to be capable of resistance. His communication officer spoke urgently. "War Marshal, we're receiving reports from across the Empire. The human transmission has been received on dozens of subjugated worlds. Rebellions are breaking out. The Council is demanding we withdraw and return to help suppress the uprisings." Krelnix looked at the tactical display, at the ruins of his fleet, at the scarred but unbroken planet below. He had come here to crush humanity and instead had walked into a trap that might end the Empire itself. "Signal the retreat," he said quietly. "All ships withdraw from this system immediately." As the Zrathian fleet jumped away, leaving behind nearly half their ships destroyed or disabled, a cheer went up across every human vessel and bunker. They had done it again. Against impossible odds, outnumbered 10 to 1, they had defended Earth. But President Chen, watching from her bunker deep beneath what used to be the Rocky Mountains, didn't cheer. She looked at the reports of casualties, millions dead from the orbital bombardment, entire regions of the planet rendered uninhabitable, and understood the true cost of victory. "How long until they come back?" she asked quietly. General Torres pulled up intelligence projections. "Weeks, maybe months. The rebellions we've sparked will buy us time, but the Empire won't stop. They can't afford to. If we survive, it proves that resistance is possible, and their entire civilization is built on the idea that resistance is futile. Then we use the time we have," Chen said. "We rebuild, we prepare, and we find allies among the species we've helped liberate. This war isn't going to end with Earth's survival. It's going to end with the Empire's transformation or destruction." Across the galaxy, on 300 worlds, beings who had lived under Imperial rule for generations looked at the technical specifications humanity had sent them, looked at the news that the mighty Zrathian Empire had been defeated twice by a single planet, and began to hope. They began to plan. They began to prepare. The Zrathian Empire had laughed at humanity and then declared war. Now, as rebellions sparked on worlds that had been pacified for centuries, as their fleets burned in a star system they should have easily conquered, the Empire faced a truth they had never encountered before. Humanity didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win. And they had just taught the entire galaxy how to do the same. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted. The empire that had ruled half the galaxy for 5,000 years now faced its greatest threat, not from a single species, but from the idea that freedom was worth fighting for, and that even the mightiest empire could bleed. And somewhere in the ruins of Earth's surface, in a bunker lit by emergency lighting, a soldier spray-painted 3 words on the wall that would become humanity's motto for the war to come. Humanity. Forever. Unbroken. The Zrathian Empire had learned to fear those words. And soon the rest of the galaxy would learn to rally behind them. Next.